Oh,
Oh, there it goes. Okay. Go
hi,
for
I'm
it.
Jenica Perez.
I'm Riley Ferens, and this is Lily Ferens.
Oh, she's so cute. Yeah, my kids might be in and out too.
Awesome. How many do you have?
I have three.
Oh, that's so fun.
Yeah,
How
they
old's your
are.
oldest?
7.
Oh, nice. Okay, so yeah, sorry, we should.
You're a sexy woman, Jessica.
Uh,
Okay,
thanks.
so here, I'll moderate. What doctrine in Wilbur's heart drove him to advocate? Why is the doctrine of the family so important to have in your heart and to be passionate and persistent? So when I answered this question, I thought it was interesting. I feel like they kind of answered the question, like the doctrine of the family. But for me, I think the doctrine that he really felt in his heart was the doctrine that all men are created equal and that we're all God's children. Because the reason I thought that was because, like, he treated everyone, all of God's creations, so equally and so kindly. Even the beggars on the street, he would give money to, and the people who needed food, he would feed. Like, he was just that kind of person that understood that every soul has inherent worth. So that's why I thought. I mean, of course, he advocated for family as well because slaves have families and they need to be protected. But I think really he was advocating for individuals and souls. So
Yeah, I agree with that. I also felt that the doctrine of the atonement was also in his heart, just being so close to that priest. And that priest had talked so much about redemption and about how redemption came through Christ. And we are all in need of redemption. And I think that um, he also had that in his heart.
yeah, and I think his name was Ulauda, the slave. I think that's another way that he had the doctrine of atonement in his life because Ulauda was a slave at one point, but he changed, and so the priest as well. He used to be a slave trader, and he completely changed. And so I'm sure he understood that people are not their title. You know, Ulauda
Right.
wasn't a slave; he was a human being, and so he had the opportunity to be a prince or a human that could advocate for the family. Or in the case of the priest who was a slave owner and a person who worked on the ships, he could get rid of his sins through the atonement. He could rid himself of the awful pain that it must have been to realize that you were part of something so terrible. And so I agree that the atonement probably played a really big part in that.
And
So
I think he showed a remarkable amount of forgiveness towards people, even knowing how cruel and what horrible things he still associated with those people on a daily basis.
yeah.
And, he was friendly with them, on good terms with them. And I think that, through the atonement, he was able to have forgiveness in his heart.
Yeah, and he gave even like that priest that he knew, he gave him so much respect. He came to him for advice and
Yeah.
for his story. And sorry. I think having the doctrine behind what you're advocating is important because you have to have the spirit in order to know what to say to change people's hearts. As much as we can try to say the right thing, or our human selves can be be very eloquent, it's not going to go to people's hearts unless it's doctrine, unless the spirit brings it to us. So
Yeah, I agree. I
so
think also we can lose our focus unless we're, it's everything's confusing right now, and what's good seems bad, and what's right seems wrong, and I think unless we have that doctrine, we're going to lose our focus. We could easily start advocating for things that aren't important or aren't good or aren't what Heavenly Father would want, just because it's so confusing. So we need to have that foundation.
yeah, and I think if we base all of the things that we advocate for, because you're right, it is completely confusing. Like I don't know how people who are in this field don't get confused. But if we're lucky because we know the proclamation of the family is the doctrine on family. We know that all
Right.
the principles in there are principles from God. And so if we just make sure that all of the advocating that we do is tied to the family proclamation. I think that's how we can make sure that we stay on the right path. It's okay. So, okay, I think we can move on to the next question.
Okay.
How did Wilbur employ a theoretical Bronfenbrenner approach to become a more effective advocate? Identify at least one thing in each system.
Well, I think the first thing he did was he was targeting people individually. And as a result, people are talking about it in their families. They're talking about it at dinner. They're talking about it amongst their friends. He made it something to be talking about. Everyone knew kind of what was going on and they were discussing it. And so because of that, they were discussing it on their family levels, but then they were also discussing it in larger circles as well. So I think that's the first thing he did.
Yeah, and I feel like because he advocated in Parliament, which is a very macro system kind of level, it kind of trickled down. Like there was a trickle down effect from his advocate, because like he changed not only the people in Parliament's views, but he changed an entire society's views on the slave trade. They spread pamphlets, so each individual's macro system or microsystem could be changed. Entire communities were changed. Different churches started to advocate for it. Like, I feel like each system was affected because of this trickle down from Parliament, because of how influential, especially at that time, it was. Yeah, you agree. Oh, good. So I think that's something that's interesting, is how influential some kind of like top-down policy can be, especially when it comes to advocating. So, though they did a lot of work on the mesosystem kind of level as well in communities by spreading Ulada's book and learning and giving a lot of giving like speeches and different things. So
I also thought he also to different societies, like he would get the upper class together and he would target them in classes, because classes was so important. He had to make sure that he was targeting each class.
And yeah, I think he was on the boat when he sponsored the boat and had them smell and look at the ship that the slaves were on. I feel like it was really effective for them to do that, because I'm sure they were so removed from the slave trade. Like, all of these people knew what was going on, but they didn't know how terrible it was, because it just seems so on the other side of the world. Kind of like how the church is talking about the refugees, the Syrian refugees right now. And sometimes it just seems so far removed from us. Like, how I don't need to do anything about it. They're like halfway across the world. Those people will take care of it. But just like they did in General Conference this past weekend, they made it personal. They made it real. They had Elder Uchtdorf. He told his story about being a refugee. Yeah. And it just made it so much more. Yeah. Do you want to give your 2 cents? It just made it so much more personal. And so I feel like that's what they were doing. They were bringing the slaves to the people so that they could make a personal connection with it, instead of just having it be some like idea like, oh yeah, somewhere in the world slaves are being beaten or something, but they're not here. Yeah. And
I think also it was a man's trade. Like, women really weren't part of it. So the men might have known what was going on, but the women, I don't think they probably knew how horrible it was. They probably didn't really know, oh, they work, we feed them, we don't pay them money, but they're getting a livelihood and, clothing or whatever.
So
I think teaching women about it was effective to change.
So I'm in World Foundations 201 this semester. Mm-hmm. And I'm pretty sure. So, I think it might have been in 101. No, it was in this one. So we had to read about Wilberforce in, I don't know where it is. Never mind. It's in like the World 201 packet. but he literally was talking to them, and I don't know if the men knew either. I really don't, because he literally was like, some of the people were appalled by what he was saying. They're like, that's not real. Of course we're not actually doing that. And so he showed them. That's why they showed him, is because these people didn't think that these terrible things were happening. They just were ignorant completely. And so I agree. I'm sure the women didn't know, but I don't even think the men knew.
Well, I mean, even in the slave traders' families, like often the women weren't aware of what was going on. So can you imagine you find out your husband's doing those despicable things? What's the first thing you do? You put an end to it.
I would put an end to it immediately.
Yeah, I think most women would. Like, you were doing that to women and children, and I think educating the people in general, but especially the women, I think that was effective.
Yeah, because I feel like, I don't know if so much now in our world, which is sad, but I feel like women have always had a special moral high ground.
Yeah.
Or at least they used to. Not, I feel like we still do sometimes in the church, which, not a high ground, but like, women are...
Or is more sensitive.
More sensitive. That's exactly. They're more sensitive to other people's suffering, too.
Yeah.
And I don't think that will ever change, but our culture kind of makes it seem like we shouldn't be, you know?
And it's not acceptable.
And it's not acceptable. And so I think that's something that has been a strength and a power to nations, is that their women are so sensitive to the things that are, the terrible things that are happening. But with modern media and things like that, we're just becoming desensitized like crazy. Okay, what are you doing? Sorry.
I think, too, women always suffered more. It's just part of being a woman's role. And I think we've kind of stepped away from that. You know, childbirth, we don't suffer as much as we used to. We can work. We're not really dependent as much as we used to be. And so I think that we are less hardened, or we're more hardened to people suffering because we don't suffer as much anymore.
Yeah, and that's a really good point, because I feel like when you suffer for someone, you feel more compassion for them. I think that's why the Savior he has perfect compassion, because he suffered perfectly for all of us. And so I feel like if we do suffer more for our children or for our families or for our communities or for the world, the more that we suffer, the more that we have compassion and can feel empathy for people.
Yeah, I've always felt that. I think that's a big reason why we suffer so much through pregnancy and childbirth for our children. It really bonds us.
That's a very good point. I don't know if I've ever really thought about that, because it's just, even, this is going to sound weird, but like, periods are terrible.
They're awful.
They are the worst.
So awful.
But there's a purpose for them. And I thought of this a lot when I was pregnant. Like, I've had really bad periods for my whole life, and this is probably too much information, but I feel like because I had that, I appreciated my daughter more, because I had to deal with that for my whole life. Like, I've had to suffer through each period, and now I feel like it's almost a sacred experience when I have my period, because I'm in pain, and it's not just generalized pain for no one. I'm in pain for my future children. I'm in pain for my daughter and my family. And so I think that's what's been helping me lately, because I have the worst periods ever. But it's so right that you're so right. Anyway, okay, we can move on.
They're worth the suffering, I think.
I'm wonderful. I'm wonderful. So,
how did they do and share their research?
okay.
And what evidence did they provide? I think that their research was so hands-on. They had the man who was part of the slave trade, and I'm not going to try and say his name because I know it'll be wrong. But, they went on the slave ships. They've talked to the slave traders. Wilberforce was friends with the priest who was, a slave ship captain. And they knew what was going on because they were so hands-on. And then that's the research they showed. They'd show people the conditions that these poor slaves were living in and what was going on. And they would show them the chains. They'd show them the size of the containers they were shoved in for their trip. And I think it was really effective being able to show them.
Yeah, I feel like it's almost like if you, I don't know, you know how many Christian churches show everyone the cross, like that's their symbol?
Yeah.
It's like, this is what Jesus did, this is how he suffered. And so people become more, I don't know, more likely to like think about Christ because they're thinking about suffering. I feel like in the same way, like if you showed, sorry, it's so hard to think.
It's okay, I get it.
So like, I'm trying to think of what I was gonna say. But just if you showed someone, my husband should be home soon. If you show someone a, like, you know, the torture weapons, the torture devices that they use in medieval times, you just think, that's awful. How inhumane.
Yeah.
How could they
So
do that
horrible.
to anyone ever? Same with the cross. How would they do that to anyone? How could they ever think that was right?
And if you knew, and it's like one thing because it happened so long ago, but can you imagine seeing those things and thinking, oh my goodness, this is happening now, and
Yeah.
in some ways I am funding this?
Yeah, I'm supporting it.
Yeah.
And I wonder, it was interesting to me that even after they did all of that, they showed all those people the terrible things, the first few times it didn't pass. And I'm like, how? How did? And it's just all about money, which is so sad.
Yeah. Well, I think that's again, you know, those wives were like, you know, I don't care. We're not doing this. And I think it just took so long, but
Yeah.
yeah. And I think probably it takes a while to figure out how you're going to have a different livelihood. So maybe some people were committed. They had to figure out how they're going to transition their business or whatever.
Yeah. That's true. And I think with something like that, like it has to come slowly. If you told, this is going to be a bad example because it's obviously not something that we advocate for, but if you took someone in the 1950s and they proposed a bill for gay marriage, obviously everyone would shut it down. Everybody.
Yeah. Even the 1970s, even the 1990s, I think.
And everyone would have shut it down. But they just creeped in so slowly over so much time. They were so persistent. That's how they ended up passing gay marriage. It wasn't overnight. It wasn't like attitudes changed overnight. They started slow, and they built, just like Wilberforce built for years to get the slaves free. And I'm obviously not comparing them because freeing slaves and gay marriage are completely different.
No, but you're right. Just the methodology they used.
And it's interesting how they swung so far with gay marriage. Instead of just giving them basic rights, instead of ensuring, like they did in Utah, where they just ensured housing and there was no discrimination in like schools and housing and things like that, they swung all the way. They were like, no, we want marriage. And that was interesting to me because I don't know, I don't feel like that was the right way to do it, but I'm still kind of, to be honest. So anyway, but that's a whole nother topic for another day. So, and then the evidence to persuade those on the fence, and I said the same thing. It was just like the real hard evidence, the facts.
Yeah. Your microphone cuts out. It's been cutting out a little bit. I'm not sure why.
Okay.
It's kind of been on and off a little bit.
I see it go, but I'm not pressing anything, so that's weird.
Okay. You're not out for more than 3 or 5 seconds, so it's not a big deal.
Well, hopefully it doesn't keep going.
Sure. Okay, so how does the film portray the importance of working together as a group?
Do you want to go first, or do you want me to?
It doesn't matter to me.
Okay. For me, I think all of them brought their strengths together, and without one part of the puzzle, it wouldn't have worked, because they needed Ulada's firsthand story. They needed Wilberforce's eloquent speaking. They needed the testimonies of the slaves. They needed the testimonies of the different people in Parliament. the signature of that one, the really prominent parliament member, all of those things work together. And if we just had one man, if it was just Wilberforce advocating, there would be no way that any of it would have gotten passed, because just one man can make a difference, but he has to be part of an organization in order to do so.
Yeah, he was smart in who he was able to reach out to. He was able to find the right people, but they were also important. I kept thinking about how difficult it is to keep going in the face of severe opposition. And I thought, when they were discouraged, they were able to like go back and lift up one another, and we need to keep going. And I think how easy it would be to give up if it was just you. But when you're working as a group in the face of severe opposition, which I feel like family advocacy is now, it's such severe opposition against it. When you work as a group, you're able to keep each other going and stay focused. And I think that's really important.
And I think that kind of reminds me of a Sacred Duty when Brother Razvan was in Istanbul, because his wife, and without the people there would be no way that he could change the minds of those hundreds of people. But because he had a team behind him, and because he had his family behind him, he was able to do that. He was able to make so many huge contributions in the world of family advocacy, because he had such a great team behind him and so much support. So I totally agree with that.
What has family advocacy group work taught you? I'm trying to think of what I said. In this class, for me, I really liked the ideas of other people. You're thinking one thing and you're kind of going a direction, and then somebody says something, you're like, oh, that's more important, or that makes more sense, or that fits the pieces together better. And I think the collaboration of ideas is really important, because one person's ideas doesn't represent, everything. It represents one small section. But when you have a lot of ideas, you see more.
I agree, and I feel like each person has different experiences. Sorry, she doesn't like to sleep, and she's tired. But each person has a different set of experiences behind them. Every person has gone through different things, so in every situation, obviously, they're going to have different viewpoints, because they've experienced different things and they've gone through different things, and that just makes it so much stronger when people with different backgrounds can come together and have the same viewpoint and advocate for the same thing. It just makes what you're saying more valid.
Yeah.
And I completely agree. It's been great this semester to have a group where we all are in different places in our lives.
Yeah.
And we can all contribute in different ways. We have 2 young moms, we had 2 single sisters, and one who was married with her kids all married and out of the house, And so I think this was especially interesting this semester, because usually we only have, like, when I was single, I was usually in a group with like 4 other single girls, and so we'd all pretty much have the same upbringing and background. And I think I found so much more strength in the eclecticness, I guess, of my group this semester. So
I agree. I really liked the first groups.
So, what parallels do you see between Wilbur and Captain Moroni in Alma 46? What is a Christian and professional family advocate, and how did Wilbur exemplify that? How can you be effective and Christ-like against such loud and often degrading voices?
Okay, I felt like Wilbur didn't stop. He didn't give up. He didn't quit. But I was also amazed at how he was able to unite people. He was able to unite his entire nation, which is something that Captain Moroni did so well. And then he didn't falter in his faith. He was so faithful and so strong. And when things got hard, he didn't give up on God. He might have been disappointed by people, but he didn't give up on God. and he had impeccable morals, and he was known as a man of integrity.
Wow. And he stuck with that. It wasn't like he only was viewed as a person with integrity in Parliament. He lived his integrity. He
Yeah.
lived his Christian values. He brought in the sick and he fed the hungry, and he gave alms to the poor. He was just one of those very virtuous people, like Captain Moroni. And I
Yeah.
think too, like, because he listened to God and he took what God said and he went forward with it like Moroni. I actually took verses 15 and 16 from Alma 46, and it says, "And those who did belong to the church were faithful. Yea, all those who were true believers in Christ took upon them gladly the name of Christ," or Christians as they were called, because of their belief in Christ, who should pray that the cause of Christians and the freedoms of the land might be favored. So the cause of Christians is abolition, because obviously keeping slaves and owning another person is not Christian. Because God owns all of our souls. He is our Father. And so I think while I was reading that, I was just thinking how he exemplified a perfect Christian by trying to abolish something that was so unchristian that people who professed Christianity were doing. And I think that's something that Captain Moroni did as well. He took things that people were doing that even when they said they were Christian, but they were doing things that were unchristian like. And so he tried to purify Christianity in a way, and I think Wilberforce did the same. So
Yeah, I agree. I think that Christian advocates and family advocates too, they seek to bring good in the world. They want to make the world a better place, and they're not doing it by tearing down. They're just putting good into the world, and they try and make the world the way Christ would want it to be. And I think that Wilberforce did that. You know, he wasn't tearing people down to make his point. He was just trying to build up, and and to instruct and to uplift people. And some of it was, well, this is hard, like this is a hard topic, but he wasn't tearing people down and he wasn't trying to belittle them. He was just trying to build up, and I really liked that.
yeah, and I think too, like, have you ever do you know who Matt Walsh is?
Yeah.
So sorry. Have you ever read one of the comment sections on his posts?
Yes.
So for me, it's interesting to see Christian people act so very unchristian when speaking their beliefs.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like have you ever read, like, LDS Smiles posts or something where the church is involved, and just having people who profess the LDS faith attack other people, even if their beliefs are correct, even if our beliefs are correct, that doesn't give us a right to belittle other religions or belittle other people, or to name call or be catty. And I feel like it's so easy online, when you're trying to advocate, to instead push your opinion and be
Yeah.
forceful about it. But I think you're right. It has to come from a kind, like you said, Wilbur didn't. He wasn't belittling other people. He was just kind of like giving good instead of trying to yank the evil away.
Yeah.
And that's kind of what we need to do, even if we're just going to be advocating on social media or in our own homes or like with our friends. We can't hide behind anonymity on the internet and still be mean and call ourselves Christian. We can't do that, because that's not Christian of us. And even if we're fighting for good things, we shouldn't be tearing other people down or causing them to, like, I don't know, like, fight. We shouldn't be fighting. We should be advocating. And I think there's a difference.
I
So,
agree. Yeah, it needs to be. We can clearly state our beliefs without trying to push them on people or hurt people or prove how we're wrong.
yeah.
And I think we need to, yeah, like you said, be putting good into the world rather than try and yank evil out of it.
And I think too, there's always going to be a compromise. But when we're so one-sided, we're not going to help anyone. We're
Yeah.
going to build up the people on our side and tear down the people on the other side, when really what we should be trying to do as Christians is find common ground and build everybody up.
Yeah.
And that's really hard because we want to be right, but we're not always going to be right. So,
Well, yeah. Yeah, we want to. I think when we don't try and find common ground, we're isolating, and we're not going to be able to, even if we are always right, even if that were the case, if we're isolating people, we're not helping. We're not making the world a better place. And we need to be trying to help everyone to the best of our ability. Now it's 6:25. Do you need to go?
I do need to go. So
Okay.
I will text you as soon as I get back, and if you're still awake, we can finish.